Little Archie, issue 161, the small one. The story taunts me at first by reminding me of the characters I'd rather the story be about, and then focuses on literal bookworms. They find a magic book, and I like that they use literally the same magic words Dilton used when he had a wish-granting book. While it is lazy, it's also nice to see a continuity nod for a change. The worm wishes he was bigger. I guess the book has residual magic on it, from all the times it was used by a witch, or its emergency magic of its own for any witches that ran out of power, and usually isn't designed with witches living on Earth in mind. It doesn't make any sense that a worm would even know what a roast beef dinner is. Everything was observed by a newsy reporter. How is there a character like this when he's not even a human? He's just a little thing, but he doesn't look like anything in particular. It wouldn't be so confusing if all of these inexplicably sentient creatures looked like aliens. Then it makes sense that they can talk, and I could assume they're all from the witch world. Conveniently, the guy's story is believed enough to be printed on the newspaper that they somehow make from nothing, and everyone believes his wild story. So mice wish for cheese. Go figure. Even though in real life they aren't actually crazy about cheese. A lot of the food that animals are associated with in cartoons, they're not always that obsessed with in real life. The mice get fat on cheese, and somehow one of them wishes for fried chicken. How are they smart enough to have clothes? Why does the book have to be found by little creatures in the house instead of regular people? At least then their sentience would make sense, but it'd also be much more boring than this interesting but nonsensical story. Hilda sees that the pantry's empty and so is the fridge, which makes no sense because why would the magic book not just summon food from thin air? Sabrina wonders how everything could disappear overnight, and instead of anyone assuming that they had a burglar, Zelda assumes that some tiny creatures got into her wish-granting book, and she says she's got to brew a spell to cancel the magic words. If she was really smart, she'd make sure the words can never be used in her house successfully again. And thankfully, the story does end with that happening, after she casts a spell near a potion to make a forgetfulness spell happen, proving that Merlin isn't the only one who can erase memories en masse. And she uses magic to make the food grow legs to get back from where it was, which is efficient. This story is a confusing one where it's never explained how all of the little creatures in Hilda's house are sentient and have clothes and a newspaper. And if they looked like aliens, it would have been just fine. But instead it's the most distracting plot hole in the story with an otherwise lazy recycled plot where characters go crazy over a wish-granting book again with the same magic words. The worm wishes he was bigger, but a small alien could have made this wish too. How did they have to be mice to make a wish for delicious cheese? They could have wanted for a cheesecake. How did everyone believe a newspaper headline about magic happening? That's another recycled idea. The worst part is that there's no reason that all of the food would disappear from the fridge and pantry and tip the ants off to the wish book being used a lot. I thought it was summoned from thin air. They'd have never found out. Little Archie, issue 162, The Magic Shop. Merlin goes to Zelda on a flying carpet, which is more interesting than a broom, and Hilda wonders what brings him to Riverdale. He says he's left King Arthur because he can't stand those awful old days. And Hilda says that she only thinks the last 200 years were good old days. Merlin says he wants to live in modern times with air conditioning, TV, and ice cream, all of which he could zap up, and there's no way witches won't have that at home. He's told he has to get a job, even though he could just summon anything he wants, and use an invisibility spell to hide. I guess he somehow thinks he needs to buy a house for air conditioning, which would require having a job to earn money. But if he's been alive for centuries, he'd need his own identity card to avoid confusing the government with his sudden appearance. How's he supposed to apply for a credit card? He's somehow never heard of a job, something that's always existed. Even he has a job as the head witch. He creates money, and I guess the reason he made a giant dollar was to show off. He says he could open a magic shop. This is the kind of thing he yelled at Zelda for. His first appearance had him lecture Zelda on handing out a wish-granting book. His shop would need to avoid wish-granting items to avoid that problem. It is unique to see a head witch that's kooky, but it's confusing because I thought he was responsible, and then he became just like Della, and now he's an outright idiot. I guess just because he's got white hair, so they're making senile jokes with him. Reggie's friends are smart enough to refuse to see his tricks because they're usually terrible. Then a magic shop appears behind them and they assume Reggie did it, instead of Sabrina. Somehow none of them go to the magic shop to check out the shop that magically appeared and startled them, even though supernatural stuff happens around them all the time, and it usually doesn't put their lives in danger. I get Jughead being obsessed with food enough to want to go to Pop Teats first, but why did Archie follow him? Most people would probably be too scared to go into a shop that suddenly appeared out of thin air, but kids might not have that judgment. Something pulls Reggie in the air and he's floated into Merlin's shop, I guess because he really wants customers. Merlin asks him what other tricks he'd like to see. Reggie says he wants card tricks even after actual magic was used on him, because he's so used to Sabrina being a good witch. How can just anybody set up a shop that's called a magic shop at that, let alone someone who seems to have just popped up? Wouldn't Merlin be approached by the government or something eventually and forced to do paperwork to set up a shop? How could he own the property it's on? Merlin tells Reggie to pick a card and the cards fly in the air. Reggie sees a bunch of animals jump out of the magician's hat, and Merlin grabs his arm, telling him to keep his hands off everything. This spills Reggie's itching powder, and Merlin tells him to just buy a trick and leave as he's itching instead of simply using magic to get rid of the itching powder. Reggie says he doesn't have a cent, which is what happens when you force someone into your shop, and Merlin relatably loses his temper and uses magic to humiliate Reggie. And the story ends with Reggie's friend saying that he literally stinks. I have to assume Reggie annoyed him out of that job, otherwise he'd keep running the shop. This story's about Merlin deciding to live in Riverdale because somehow it has stuff that you'd think witches would have used magic for or already figured out. And he's told he has to get a job, and somehow makes the reckless decision to set up a magic store and float a mortal into it. This is the same person who tried to depower Zelda for handing out a witch-granting book. And when Sabrina's family sold their magical things to a bunch of people in the town, he returned everything to normal. But his shop would involve him doing the same thing. It's got a genie bottle in it. This is the third personality he's had. I guess each version of Merlin is in a different parallel universe. Next up is Little Archie issue 163, of course. Little Sabrina, the Christmas Tree. Sabrina complains to Hilda because it's Christmas Eve and they don't have a Christmas tree. Hilda says that this year they'll have one. If she relents that easily, why didn't she do this every other year before it? I guess she's 3. This is the first year she's able to ask for this. I doubt that. She complains that she hates artificial trees. I guess she means magically generated ones, in this case. Lucky for her, Zelda sides with her and asks happily to buy a real tree this year. So far, I don't see how Sabrina being younger makes a difference, and I'm enjoying it. The story was pretty lazy and predictable so far, so I was happy that there was at least a joke where Hilda handed 35 cents to the tree salesman, because she's so old. Because otherwise, the story seems like it was very easy to come up with. But this is Sabrina's typical charm. The salesman laughs, thinking that Hilda's joking, and Zelda asks how much for the little tree. And Sabrina magically knows that it was left over from last year. Zelda cheaps out and buys it, and somehow Sabrina's perfectly fine with getting a tree this lame. They all start flying the tree home, so the salesman says he's been working too hard. At least it was nice of Zelda to say Merry Christmas, whether Della would like it or not. Finally, Sabrina says that it doesn't look much like a Christmas tree, and so Hilda uses magic on it. And Sabrina doesn't look happy, but at least appreciates that it looks different from how it did before. I guess the reason she doesn't insist on it looking like a real Christmas tree is that she doesn't want to push her luck with her aunts because she's just a kid. It still seems off-puttingly out of character for her to just drop it with her aunts and decide to go to bed. You'd think she'd use magic to make it look right. Hilda says they're gonna stay up and say hello to Santa. She and Zelda fall asleep, and Sabrina tells them to wake up because it's 4 o'clock and Santa hasn't been here yet. So Zelda says something must have happened to him. I'd expect Hilda to think she's better than Santa and not want to stay up all night to meet him. This is more realistic behavior, but it's redundant having two ants with the same personality. They decide to start looking for him at the North Pole. It turns out his sled hit a meteor. I guess we're supposed to assume it hit the sled way too fast for the sled to dodge it. But it looks like Santa ran headfirst into it. One, that'd kill him, and two, he'd have seen it coming. But I guess it was so fast that it crashed into him the instant he saw it. Good thing Santa's got the magical ability of being invincible. He's already got other magical powers, so why not? Zelda and Hilda offer to help him, despite the fact that Della encourages them to be evil witches and wants to punish witches that are good. Good thing they have the courage and motivation to do this, and she doesn't show up. But it'd actually take advantage of Sabrina's character if she was the one insisting on this. Instead, she might as well have not been here. Zelda's told they can't fly all the presents on one broom. She makes lots of brooms. And one of the reindeers quip that he doesn't have a driver's license. Then a kid sees Hilda, who says she's just a helper. It's realistic that he stutters nervously at seeing her, because his first instinct would be to assume that she's a home invader. The story ends with Santa saying that things are certainly different at Sabrina's because of the way they have turkey. There's a turkey holding a fork at the table. I have to just assume it's an other realm alien. Why is he here? There's just suddenly a turkey person here for the sake of a joke. I'm not supposed to assume it makes sense because he's a friend of Zelda or something. So that was the whole story? That was it? It's a Sabrina story. I wanted Sabrina to do a lot more than that. This story was about Sabrina wanting her aunts to buy her a real Christmas tree, since she's raised in the mortal realm. They humor her because they love her that much. I like the joke where Hilda underestimates how expensive it'll be, because that took advantage of her being a witch. Without it, this was just a very generic, cliched plot any series could do. Complete with a total cliche that the main characters have to take over for Santa Claus. A kind of plot idea that's so cliche that I actually stopped watching the episode of the sitcom the minute that it happened. At least it felt new to me why they had to help him. His sled was hit by a meteor. They knew they had to help him because, as witches, they thought to stay up late and greet him, and he didn't show up. You'd think that Santa would be a witch in this universe to explain his super speed and flying sled and being fine with living in the North Pole, and therefore he'd have used magic to solve this problem himself. He just fixed his own sled, but it's fine. We're never shown that he can fix his sled. It was good of Hilda to want to help him, but it felt out of character when she's normally a proudly evil witch. It should have been written that Sabrina begged her to help. Well, she was clearly too lazy and selfish to without being talked into it. That'd make me more grateful. Instead, Sabrina was silent. Her only agency in the story was asking for a tree. She completely calmly accepted it when she got a lame tree, and it was made into a creepy witch tree. And I'm left to just assume she thought she'd get in trouble for asking for it to be made to look normal. And I'm left to assume that she's too stupid to turn it normal with magic. She might as well have been a normal girl in this story. Her being a little girl didn't make a single difference to the plot. It was literally just a character design difference to appeal to kids. Which is redundant because the teenage version appealed to kids just as well. This just proves that the Sabrina animated series has no excuse for being the way it is. We already had a different version of the Sabrina series where she was younger, and it didn't have to come with any drawbacks. There's no excuse for her being treated like a kid if it annoys us. This series doesn't have to be any different than normal just to appeal to more kids, when this story thought making her look younger was good enough. I was disappointed by her barely doing anything as a character in this story. Instead, it felt like it ended halfway through, and the story was very forgettable because, go figure, the main characters have to help Santa Claus. Little Archie, issue 164. TV or not TV? Somehow there's only a few listeners for Riverdale's one small TV station, where somehow the newscaster falls asleep. Sabrina gets told to wake up, and the newscaster says nothing ever happens in Riverdale, apparently not hearing any rumors of magical events happening. And somehow he actually responds to what Sabrina said when she says that the TV spoke to them. And he tells Sabrina's family to come to the station and operate it while he's on vacation. I think I entered a dark age of Little Sabrina a while ago. This story's not even trying to make sense. Zelda says she's always wanted to be on TV. giving her some more character. It's at least more fun than her predictably being scared of being on TV because she might expose her witchcraft. And Sabrina, of course, wants to do the cartoon show. The family flies on a broom in front of the newscaster, who's surprised at it. But it is possible for him to be surprised that he's seeing a fellow witch, but if he was a warlock, he would say, "Oh, it's a witch, I'm a warlock." So it's not even like he's a warlock, and that's why he was able to hear and talk to Sabrina. Hilda wonders what button to push to start the day. Why wasn't she given a note telling her what to do? Why didn't that guy question the fact that he got a magical TV from a witch, and that's gotta be why he was able to talk to Sabrina through it? Zelda suggests pushing them all, and then Hilda sprays Weatherby out of nowhere, telling him to wake up because Station Riverdale's on the air. But no, it's not revealing that the whole thing was just his dream. She just used her magic to spray him through the other side of the TV. Sabrina tries to help Pop Tate by advising him to advertise on her TV station she got insanely easily, and he's smart enough to say that no one really watches it. Sabrina says things are about to change. I like that Reggie's smart enough to know that she's talking about magic. He was right because the show has Zelda pull a dragon out of a hat, which even has its claws go out of the screen. Then she says she'd better make an audience appear out of thin air, and cast a spell to brainwash tons of people in the town into watching TV. This causes some chaos because Grundy interrupts her math lesson to tell the kids to watch TV, and someone tells the pilot to land the plane, and Weatherby wants to watch TV too. How are none of these witches able to realize what's morally wrong with this spell? Sabrina's a kid, but she's also supposed to be a good person. So you'd think she'd know that some people have better things to do right now, like doing surgery. And Hilda's still sassy in this comic, but she's not quite as mean, so that's probably why she's less focused on morality. Zelda advertises for Pop Tate, which is nice of her, and then Hilda somehow assumes the commercial won't sell anything, even though Zelda just cast a spell in front of her to brainwash people into watching the station, unfairly taking views away from other TV stations. Hilda then casts a spell to brainwash people into going to the chocolate shop. I can't take it anymore. I always hated the apostrophe in the name of that shop. It forces me to stop and capitalize the lit part of it. It's such an awkward name. At least this time, a few people aren't brainwashed into that. Zelda's spell is so disruptive that it causes the owner of the TV station to come to Pop Tate's when he's supposed to be on vacation. So it causes him to waste money going here. And then he'll have to spend even more money to go back. Or he might not even be able to afford to go back there at all. I'd rather the plot continuously progress instead of stopping in its tracks to have the head witch lecture and punish them, but it'd still be nice if the story ended with something bad happening to the ants. The owner of the TV station asks Zelda how it went later, and Hilda plays a violin, like in the 90s show, while Sabrina dances. It impresses the owner because the station never had singing and dancing before. The story ends with them deciding to rerun Zelda's shows. At least Zelda looks unhappy, but that wasn't enough to keep the ants from being karma Houdinis. This story is about Sabrina's family somehow being put in charge of Riverdale's TV station when the owner decides to take a vacation and somehow talks to them and hears them from the television. The writer's been watching way too much of the Jetsons. Predictably, the ants put on a magic show, but they also crossed the line by brainwashing people into watching the station and going to Pop Tate's, even if it might be an inconvenient time for them, which must have had huge consequences. So it's annoying that the ants never realized they did anything wrong and end the story without any sort of punishment and lecture. Sabrina never said a word to complain.